All right, how y'all doing today? I just wanted to make this video for everyone because I know that understanding objects can be a challenge. And I know that we're now in assignment 2. And you may be having a lot of questions on how these objects are working in the program or the algorithm or the software that you're writing. And so what I want to do is I kind of want to break down the object part in assignment 2 for you so you can kind of visualize and see what's actually going on. And I do believe it's going to help you understand better objects by showing you how to see how it's working. As you become a better and stronger software developer and your confidence is stronger, you won't have to use these techniques. You'll understand what it's doing. So right now, because you're new at programming, I want to break down how the object is actually working. So let's get into the assignment. So here we are in assignment 2, the scramble scorer. And we have the instructions here. I'm not going through this whole entire instructions. All I really want to do is I want to take you to the actual replit, and I kind of want to break down the object portion. So we're going to go over to the replit. And so here we are. We have the replit right here. And inside of it, we give you all this code that we already have written for you that you didn't have to write. And what we're going to focus on, we're going to focus on the old point structure as well as the old scramble scorer function. I mean, the old point structure object and the old scramble scorer function that we created for you. And also, too, we gave you some instructions on how to get the functions to work. And we told you in the instruction we want you to initialize an input, right? So what I'm going to do is let's go back over here to the instructions. And in the starter code, if we hit the scramble button play, we should see this inside the console. So let's go down here. Let me hit run. And there it is. Let me let it up a little bit. Let's play some Scrabble. So I'm just going to give you this first little part so I can show you how the object is actually working. Now, you should have already watched the other video that I made for you guys in the Bright Squirrel. It's kind of walking through the actual instructions. But here, we're going to go through part A. And you always want to do when you're writing code, you want to write it in small pieces and make sure it's working as that you want it to work. So here it says to modify and to provide initial prompt function to prompt the user to enter a word to score. And so this is what the output is supposed to look like. As you can see here, it says enter a word, right? So we know that I'm going to put this inside of the input. So let me go ahead and go back over to Replit. One of the things I want to do first is that I want to create a global variable to hold. And so I'm going to call this user. And I'm going to assign that to an empty string. And we understand from working with our first assignment on how to create variables to store things, because we know that a variable is a container. So we're going to store the prompt, whatever we prompt the user to give us is going to be stored in this variable. And I'm going to make it global so other functions can have access to it later if need be. So here, let's go down here to the actual initial input. So now let's go by what you already know and understand how to do. So what we want to do is we're going to have user, and then I'm going to create the input dot question, and then I'm going to pass in the string asking the question, and that's not what I copied. So let me go back over here and grab that again and copy this. So let me go ahead, place that in, put a little space in there. And so now when I run this should work. This should prompt the user, and then we can put in what we prompt. Also remember, always format your code. And so now I'm running it. And so it's asking me enter the word to score. Now, when I go back here and I look at the actual output, I'm going to put a space in there so I can kind of make it match. Okay, so you remember how to do that. So all I need to do is a backslash in. Now I'm going to run that, stop that, run it, and there we go. So I'm going to use count, hit enter. Okay, so everything is working. So far so good, correct? So now another thing that we want to do is I want to be able to use the old Scrabble scorer function provided to score the word provided by the user. So that actual variable that I'm storing my answer in, I have to be able to put, use this function. So I want to call that function. And so remember, I run program here. Remember, it has the initial prompt. That's how it knows to ask the question and how to, so that you can enter in the response. So what I want to do here, I want to console.log because I need that. I want to have that function. So the function that I need is right here. Let me grab it because I don't want to misspell it. So it's old Scrabble word. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this function. I'm going to copy it. Let me copy it. And then I'm going to place it in here. And remember, this is how you invoke a function or call the function by giving the function name with the actual parentheses. And I have a parameter called word. It works as a variable, remember? And so because I'm looking for an argument and it's got to have some type of string in it, I'm going to pass in that user because that's where I'm storing my actual input. So boom, it all works, right? So it's giving me back the 0.4. So let's go back and let's look at the actual function. Let me erase this down just a little bit. And let's look at the function and see what the function is doing. If you notice here, we're passing in word as the parameter. So it's expecting some argument, and it has to be a string. So that's what we want it to be. We can always change it. And if you noticed here, all those letters are capitalized because we're using to uppercase method on that word object. And all of this is working within the function. We're not hard coding anything in. We're using the function to produce the output we're looking for. And then we have letters point an empty string. Now I could have put my user inside of here as well, but I might need to use it later on. So that's why I made it global. If I put user on line 20, then it's local to only this particular function. So letter points is only local to this particular function. Now, another thing that I want you to see here is that on line 21, we have what we call a for loop. And this is the opening part, bracket for the for loop. And on line 30 is the closing. But inside of that for loop, we have another for loop, which we call a nested for loop. As you get better with programming, one of the things about this particular function that we wrote by using a nested for loop is what we call big O notation. Is deals with the space and time complexity. This particular for loop or this particular function, the space and time complexity would be O of n squared, meaning that this is the worst case scenario for performance. Well, it's not a big deal when the data is small, like I'm just putting in a word count. And so that's very small. And so the program is going to work quickly. The function is going to work quickly. But what if I had 1 million pieces of data running through that function? Well, it's going to slow down immensely because how O of n squared works, it works on like a scale. And if I had a graph, I'll show you that it just keeps increasing. As more data comes in, it just keeps increasing. The space keeps increasing. The space keeps and time keeps increasing. And so that makes the program inefficient. But for us teaching you and helping you to understand how it works, we're using a nested for loop here, which is almost like a brute force approach. And there's other ways to solve this to make it more efficient. You can use a hash table with pointers to make it more efficient. But right now, we want to learn how this is working. So this is for training purposes. This is why we're doing it this way, because we're teaching you the fundamentals and the principles of the programming language. So now let's get back here into the function. And as you can see, we have the first function where we're iterating over the word, whatever word we put in, which we did count. And then we iterate over the old point structure, which is this object right here with all these keys in it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 keys, and each key has an array of letters. And we have all 26 letters represented here. And you notice that they're all capitalized. This is why we did 2 uppercase on the word. We want the word to be uppercase to match, because again, if I would have did it, because I entered it in lowercase, if I would have just didn't address for case sensitivity, then this would have been wrong. It wouldn't have outputted the way it should output. So let's look at that. So when I come here, let me comment that out and let me run it now. Then I'm gonna do count. As you can see, nothing happened because there's nothing matching. It's not matching. It's not finding the actual information that we're inputting. And this is why I want to show you how this is working. So what I want to do is I want to see how this function is actually working. And we're going to be understanding it from how it's working with this particular object. So first, what do we do when we want to find out how something is working? You want to use your trusty console log. So we're going to do a console.log. And what are you thinking here that we should do? What should I pass in this console.log to see how it's working? Well, of course, you should be thinking I. So make sure I always format your code. I'm going to run it. So I'm going to put in count. I hit when Replit does that. Hit enter. Oh man, what happened here? Where am I at? Okay, I wasn't in there we go. So let me raise this up. So what it's doing is iterating over the floor. It went ahead and gave me each one of the actual indexes, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's letting me know that this is have index of 4, but it has 5 items, which is COUNT, count. And so as you can see that I know that it's letting me know what the length of word is, whatever I input in there. So if I go down here and I start it over and I just put in the letter X, it just gives me X. And let's see where X is. X is right here on the number 8 key. So it knows that X is stored there. So let's look at, I want to see this in action. I want to see it all print out so I can see, is it working the way I need for it to work? So on console.logging I, another thing that I can do, because I want to see if it's pulling out each one of those letters. So I'm going to create another console.log, but this time I'm going to pass in the word and I'm going to pass I. And so now let me run it. Use count again. So we can see what's going on. Okay, so you see it now. So index, it gives me the index 0. What's at 0? C. What's at 1? 0. O. And then 2, and so forth and so on. So it breaks it down so I see each one of the actual letters broken down. So that's making sense. But now another thing that I want to check, and so let me put a little separation here, because what I want to check is this other for loop working? And this is important. And the reason why I say this is important, because you want to see how these for loops is actually iterating. And this is why I say with the big O of N squared is that it has to loop through all of the whole entire object for it to find what it's looking for. And so if you had, like we only have 5 items here, that's not a big deal. But what if you had 1,000,000? That means it has to iterate 1,000,000 times in order to go through wherever that data is coming from. So what I want to do is I want to put another console.log here. And what I want to console.log, I want to console.log this point of view that we are storing whatever the iteration is. I'm going to do my formatting so I can make sure everything is where it's supposed to be, so I can read it and see it always format your code. So let me run it again. So here we go. We got count. And let me raise this up so we can see what's going on. All right, so we got C, and I put the line in here so we can break it up. So do you see how it's iterating over all of these of what's inside that object? So it gets me all the keys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, and 10. And so if I look up here, I have 10 keys inside of this particular object. And then as you can see right here, it goes to the next one, which is 1. And so what I'm going to do is let me divide that a little bit so we can kind of get a little separation, right? So you can kind of see it. So let me go ahead and get that console log, and let me put it right here. And let me see. Let's run it again. Run it. Okay. And so it actually goes through and put it on each individual. So that's, to me, it's not clear. So let's take that out. We don't need that. So it's not clear. So we know that it is giving me each one of the indexes. So I'm checking the point of view. And so, you know what? I'm going to do this. Let me try this and see if this works. So instead of putting it right there, I'm going to get this point of view and put point of view right here. And let me run it again so we can kind of see the separation. See if this works. All right. So, okay. So here we got index 0, and we know C is at index 0. So we get a line to separate. And that means it iterated over each one of those keys. Point of view 1, point of view. So it iterated over each one before it goes back up to the next index. So if we remember how our for loop works, we initialize I at 0 so it's starting at the first index, the 0 index, and it's giving us a number. So we got 0, 1, 2. So if 0 is asking if whatever number that I put in as the argument, whatever is at the first index 0, then if that's true, it's going to store that inside of I, the variable. Once it does that, it doesn't go back and give me all the indexes first. It goes to the next for loop, and then it loops through that. And because the object has over 10 keys in it, or has all those keys in it, it has to go and pull all of those keys out. And then once it complete all of those keys, it gives me all the keys, and it stores it inside of the point value. Then that part of the actual for loop is done, and then it goes back to the top for loop and iterate over that and finds, is there index 1? If that's true, it stores whatever is at index 1 inside of I, and then it goes to the back down to the nested for loop and goes again, and it goes through the object and pulls all the keys out again and stores them in point value. So now we see how that's working. Hopefully this is making sense to you. Trying to take my time here. But so here we have the point view. We see how it's looping. We see how it's working. So now I need to understand in this conditional what I have here, and we understand how objects work. We got the O point structure object. And to get access to this actual variable that we created called point value, I have to use the bracket notation. And remember, this is actually a variable. That's why we don't have the quotes around it. So we use the quotes for the property name, but for the actual variable, we don't need the quotes. And so we're using the method includes. And what do we want to include? We want to include whatever the argument word is, because word is our parameter. And so now that when I type into the input and give my input of whatever I want to check the value of the word is, now whatever that word, so right here it says word, but replace it with count. And so count is now being stored. Each letter of count is stored in the index I, or the variable I. So I want to get access to that because with the bracket notation. And now it wants to be included with the point value. So if this is all true, then we're able to run this statement here, which is the letter points that we created here, and we initialized it at an empty string. So now we're storing in this points value. So right here at the end, we got the points for, and then what we're passing in the word I, which is whatever the letter is going to give me each individual letter, because it's iterating over each one. So now let's go back and recap. So here we got the first for loop. It iterates, it looks for whatever is at index 0. It finds the C, which we know is true because it didn't get to the end of the string. So when the compiler sees that string, because when I put my input in, it automatically defaults to a string. And so when it sees that quote, it knows that it's a string and is looking, because we have that property .length on it. It says, okay, I need to get to the end of this. So when it's initialized at I, so I sees that it's C. It's true. Let's store C and I. But then it drops down because it's working from top to bottom. It drops down to the next one, because understand, we didn't make it to the end of this for loop yet, because the opening bracket for the first for loop is on 21. The ending one is on, I believe this is line 29. I think it's on 29. Let me make sure. Yes, line 29, I think. Yeah, line 29 or line 33. I'm sorry. Line 33 is where that bracket ends. So it's still within the first loop. So as it goes down and we increment it to go to 1, but before it can do that, it has to run through this second for loop, which we created the for in loop with the point value variable that wants to get everything inside a old point structure, and it's giving me all of the actual keys that's inside of old point structure. So the reason why I'm asking for the for in here, because, and I created that variable, and notice that I created it to be singular. I used a singular point value instead of point values. The point value, because inside of this object, there's only one object, but it has all these keys. It has a lot of information in it, but it's only one object. And what I'm asking for by using the for in is because I want everything that's inside that object. And so now I got everything inside that object, and now it's stored everything in the object, which is all the keys. And so now all the keys are stored inside a point value for the first iteration. Then it sees this if statement, and it says, okay, if old point structure, and I'm passing in the point value, which is all the keys for that first run. And then I want to also include whatever the first index of whatever word I inputted. And then I'm going to add this template literal with the first letter and plus with all the point values, whatever point value it is. And understand this, as it iterates, it finds in the point value, it finds the right key that letter is actually stored in. So when it does is when it goes through and iterates and it goes real fast, it noticed that C is on key 3. So key 3 has the value of the actual array that has C. So that's why it knows just to print the 3, right? So let's go a little bit further. So what do that mean I need to do here? I want to check something here. Now I want to find out in this for loop, inside this if statement, I want to be inside the block. So I'm going to put my up and then copy. Sometimes it don't copy like I want it to copy, or sometimes I'm on my PC doing this. So, all right. So this time, what do I want to check for? I want to check for this word, because I want to see if that is getting stored, if it's finding it for me inside a point value. So let me run it again. I'm going to use count. All right, let me pull this up. So here we go. Index 0, C. Oh, look at this here. Right here at point value C, it found it in index 3. Right there, it found it in index 3. So let me do something so we can see that, so you can believe me when I say, okay, it did find it in key inside of the key. So let me see if I put it up here first, and then I'm going to change this to stars. Let me put some stars right there. Let me run it again. Let me put count. All right, let me lift this up so we can see. All right, so here we go. So we got C, point value, and then there it is right there. It's right there at point value C, because the next point value is 4. And so when I get down here to index 1, which is O, and it finds O at point value 1. So if we go all the way down here, we see that the keys is being assigned, is finding those letters. So now, if you don't believe me, let's do this. Let me just put in D. Where's D at? So I'm gonna just do 1. So D. So I only did 1. So at index 0, which is D, it's capitalized. So that means my 2 uppercase is working. So it'll match, and it finds D. Where did it find D? It found D at key number 2. So let's go up here to key number 2, and there D is right there. So I hope that kind of helped you to kind of see how the function is working with the object and seeing how it's iterating over each one, so you can better understand how these for loops are working. So the takeaway today should be you learned a little bit more about the function, how it's working, how we write it, how we call it, how we invoke it. It's the same thing. We're understanding how the for loop work with the nested for loop, and how it's working with the object, how we're using the for in loop to find the key, and then it searches the key to see is this particular input is inside that particular key. And so if I was to do this, let me run it again. So you always want to play around with this, right? So everything is going to be converted to uppercase, right? So what I'm going to do, where we at? Let me see. All right. I'm going to comment that out because it's got to be uppercase. So let me run it again to make sure this is working. So I'm gonna go COUNT. Now I got 2 lowercase. Let's see what happens when I hit enter. Notice that we know that the uppercase is not working because it didn't register the lowercase letters. That's why I wanted you to see that. I wanted it to make sense to you. You need to visualize how this is working. All right. I hope this video was helpful for you. Hopefully it answers some of the questions dealing with the objects, dealing with the for loops, the for in loop, and you're able to visualize what it's actually doing. So as you go further in this assignment, you start playing around with it to get a good understanding. I'm going to make more videos for you as I see things that I notice that, okay, this may be something that may be hemming people up. I'll make a video for you. So again, remember, the more you practice, the more you improve. All right, see you in the next video.